talk to you today about the momentum tunnel. In one of my more recent films, I ended the film by saying that I would take some time to speak about this at some point soon. And so this is the subject today. So I'm going to make use of this cardboard tube, perfectly normal cardboard tube, to talk about the subject at hand. So this is one of the very interesting methods that shamanism has to talk about something very particular that happens to us as people. So, when a person launches themselves into any aspect of their life, it could be a relationship, it could be a job, it could be a particular lifestyle, then it puts a lot of emphasis on the person to put a lot of energy in to start with, and then once they've put their energy in and their intent into that particular thing they're doing, then off they go. So that's rather like there's the end of the tube, and the person launch themselves into the end of the tube, and then they find themselves travelling along the inside of that tube. So I'm going to give you a personal example from my life where I did this. So I put my own intent into getting a job as a medical science officer in pathology in a big London hospital, and I started that job full of enthusiasm, and the more I got into what I was doing, the more I discovered things which caused me to become deeply concerned. Because my job really was to take samples of people's body parts and body fluids and find out what infections were in them and identify particular antibiotics that would be useful to cure that particular condition, and then give the doctor advice about which ones to use. So in the bits of time that I had that was spare, I used to go to the local medical library inside the hospital and read about the different drugs which I was prescribing for the doctors to use. And I remember reading about one particular commonly prescribed antibiotic at that time and discovering that its single use caused irreversible liver damage, and that really took me up short and gave me a big shock. And it then produced what I would call an ethical dilemma, because I found myself doing a job where I was getting reasonably well paid. I had all the security of a regular income, and yet what I was doing, an aspect of what I was doing, I was not happy about, because I didn't like the idea of prescribing something that a patient was going to take at the behest of a doctor, which would then cause them more problems with their body later on. So that was where an example of a thought form, and my thought form was this particular antibiotic is going to cause some irreversible damage to that person. That produced an ethical dilemma. So that was like I was going along the tube of that particular job within the confines of the tube, and everything was fine, and then I had something happened which, because it bothered me, I then was confronted with a choice, and the choice is, do I stay within this tube travelling along my career path with all the security and safety that that gives, or do I leap outside the momentum tunnel and do something completely different? And what I chose to do is I chose to leave behind my safe career and all that I was doing, and I was very fascinated by many aspects of that job, and leave it to something much more uncertain. And I ended up working in a health food store and advising people about different foods they could take which would be good for their health. So that was a great step to take, but it involved a lot of risk. The pay was lower and there was no job security, whereas before I was working for the NHS and I had total job security. So that's the example of me taking a leap out of the momentum tunnel, out of choice. Now I want to give you another example where it didn't happen out of choice. Again, I found myself years later in a completely orthodox, well-managed job with a good job security and the safety of a regular monthly income. At that time I was working as a teacher. And what happened is, at a certain point in that teaching career, it wasn't an ethical dilemma that came up. What it was in that particular case is that the job was having far too much of a strain on my physical body, and it was causing me to become run down and effectively worn out, because I was doing a 7-day a week. So what that happened is that my body took charge. So there I was in the momentum tunnel of being a teacher with the regular income. By this point I had 2 children to support, so actually I was much more trapped inside the momentum tunnel than the first time. The first time I was a single person. This time I actually got all the responsibilities of a wife that didn't have a job but was actually chronically sick herself, and 2 children. So the pressures to stay in the momentum tunnel were much, much greater. And yet my soul knew that what I was doing was wrong for me. And so what happened is that I made all these attempts to get out of the job and they all failed, and so the body took charge and gave me a chronic illness, which then meant I was incapable of doing the job and I got thrown out because I couldn't do the job after a whole lengthy process. So that's an example of, again, where I left the 99%. So in shamanism we say, once you're inside the momentum tunnel of any situation, you're staying safe within the 99%. And to take a leap out of that into anything else that could happen really does require particular effort. So when a person's got any kind of a serious illness, what this is the cry from the person's soul saying, whatever momentum tunnel you're in at the moment, you really need to leave. And what we tend to find is a person will get into a situation with that serious illness that more and more of their normal abilities become non-functional, and they get to the point that they can't function very well at all, and things are getting desperate. And the most extreme example I ever heard about was about a man who had a job, and he was a particle physicist, incredibly important, high-powered job, extremely well paid. So he was emotionally wedded to that job, but he was very unhappy because he had no partner. He was working all the hours that God sent, and his body eventually showed its displeasure by coming out with a really aggressive form of cancer. And he was told by the specialist, you've got 3 or 4 months to live, and that's the choice you've got, and we can't do anything for you. So then he went to the shaman, and the shaman said to him, very simple choice here, you've got to make some radical changes to your lifestyle. In other words, leap out of the momentum tunnel, and if you don't, you can see what the prognosis is because you've already been given that by the doctor. So this very brave man decided, right, this is it. He gave up his job as a particle physicist, massive respect, massive kudos, fame, all these things that he had, salary, and he gave it all up to become a carpenter. Very low pay, status, nothing like the same thing. And 6 months went by, and after 6 months he went back to see the shaman, and he brought his partner. So the fact he'd managed to make such a huge personal change in his life circumstances, despite all the odds, despite all the difficulties, despite being so ill, he actually got the massive result in the breakthrough. So he broke through and broke out of that momentum tunnel, and he got his reward because he didn't die, he kept his health, and his partner manifested, that partner that could not manifest before, because working all the hours God sent, of course, meant that he never got to meet his partner. But now he was doing a job with normal hours, which was to be a carpenter with much less money. That then meant he had more time, and in that free time he met his partner. So this goes to show that if a person is in a situation where all the circumstances start to really look tough in terms of illness or some other extreme, this is really your soul crying out to you and saying, it's time for a change. And the more desperate the need for a change is, the more challenging it will be to take the steps that you need to take to be able to break out. And this is what we mean in shamanism by the momentum tunnel. And it's been an interesting thing just to look back in my life, and I can see that because my life has been one continuous shamanic path journey, with me mostly being unaware of it, that was what was going on. It meant that I had repeated situations where I would find myself a momentum tunnel to get into, go along it for a certain distance, circumstances would happen, and I was then given the choice to either stay in, which would have given more and more stagnation, more and more difficulties, or to leap out of it. So this year, 2012, it's what I keep saying, if you're in a momentum tunnel that doesn't satisfy you, that's not right for you, that is actually not fulfilling your needs, you will know it, because you will suffer from either illness or unhappiness or depression or some other really difficult circumstances which will become so in your face as this year goes by that you will be screaming to change. And if you do, just remind yourself, okay, it takes great courage and great effort to make a step out of that momentum tunnel, but whenever you do that, you will step out of whatever you're doing, which may seem really great, into something far more wonderful. So I have great respect for anyone who finds themselves stuck in any situation that's difficult, and my advice for you is to know that you are guided, to know that your higher self is rooting for you every step of the way, and to take courage in both hands and do that thing, whether it's taking the offer of some healing, or taking the offer of a new career, taking the offer of a new relationship, a new place to live, go for it and then enjoy the results. So the momentum toll, that's what we mean by it, and it's your opportunity to embrace something new this year. Thanks very much. Cheers.